A quiet Sunday night in November turned into a nightmare when 24-year-old Sarah Mitchell made a frantic 911 call. "Help me, please. They shot my parents. They're bleeding everywhere." But what investigators discovered next would shake an entire community to its core, because the real killer wasn't a stranger breaking in. The real killer was the daughter herself, and her motive? Her boyfriend. A twisted love story that ended in the most unthinkable betrayal imaginable. Sarah Mitchell had orchestrated the murder of her own mother, all for a man who convinced her that her parents stood in the way of their happiness. Tonight, we uncover the shocking truth behind a daughter's ultimate betrayal, and how love became murder. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell seemed like the perfect daughter. 24 years old, living in the quiet suburbs of Markham, just outside Toronto. Her parents, David and Linda Mitchell, had built a comfortable life. David worked as an engineer, Linda as a piano teacher. They lived in a 2-story house on Maple Street, the kind of neighborhood where children rode bicycles and neighbors waved to each other. But perfection was Sarah's prison. From the moment she could walk, her parents had mapped out her entire future. Perfect grades, perfect college, perfect career. No boyfriends until after graduation, no parties, no freedom, just endless pressure to be the daughter they dreamed of. And for years, Sarah played the role perfectly, or so her parents believed. What David and Linda didn't know was that their perfect daughter had been living a double life for 7 years. 7 years of carefully constructed lies, 7 years of sneaking around, and 7 years of being deeply, obsessively in love with a man they had forbidden her to see. His name was Marcus Thompson, 26 years old, charming, and everything Sarah's parents despised. He didn't have a college degree, he worked odd jobs, and in their eyes, he was ruining their daughter's future. Sarah had met Marcus during her senior year of high school. While her parents believed she was studying at the library, she was falling in love. Deep, consuming, desperate love. The kind that makes you do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep it alive. Marcus became her escape from the suffocating expectations at home. With him, she could laugh, she could dream, she could be herself. But keeping their relationship secret was slowly destroying her. Every lie required 10 more lies to cover it up. Sarah told her parents she was in university when she had actually dropped out after failing her first year. She forged report cards, created fake graduation ceremonies, even hired actors to play professors during parent meetings. The web of deception grew larger and more complex each day, but as long as she had Marcus, as long as she had their love, the lies felt worth it, until the day her parents discovered the truth. It was a Tuesday evening in October when Linda Mitchell found the love letters hidden in Sarah's bedroom. Pages and pages of romantic messages between her daughter and this Marcus Thompson. The betrayal was immediate and brutal. David's voice echoed through the house that night. "You choose, Sarah, him or us, but you cannot have both. If you see him again, you are no longer our daughter." The ultimatum was clear, and for Sarah, it felt like a death sentence. The weeks that followed were torture for Sarah. Her parents monitored her every move. They drove her to and from her supposed job interviews. They checked her phone. They controlled her bank account. She was 24 years old, but treated like a prisoner in her own home. And Marcus was growing tired of the secrecy. He wanted a real relationship. He wanted to meet her friends, her family. He wanted a future together. But how could Sarah explain that her parents would rather see her dead than with him? During those dark weeks, Sarah began to fantasize about a different life. A life where she and Marcus could be together without hiding. A life where she didn't have to choose between love and family. But there seemed to be only one way to make that dream possible. Her parents had to be removed from the equation. The thought crept into her mind like poison. At first, she pushed it away, but as the pressure mounted, as Marcus threatened to leave her, as her parents tightened their control, the unthinkable began to feel inevitable. Sarah started researching online. How much money would she inherit if her parents died? The house was worth over $400,000. Their life insurance policies totaled another $300,000. With that money, she and Marcus could disappear, start fresh somewhere else, build the life they had always dreamed of. But first, her parents had to die. And Sarah knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. She needed someone who wouldn't ask questions, someone who would do anything for money. Through Marcus's connections in the underground scene, Sarah made contact with two men willing to kill for cash. The plan was simple, but brutal. They would break into the house during a quiet evening, make it look like a robbery gone wrong, kill both parents, leave Sarah alive as the grieving survivor. She would inherit everything: the insurance money, the house, the freedom to be with Marcus forever. It was the perfect crime, or so they thought. November 8th, 2010. A Sunday evening that would change everything. Sarah had spent the day with her parents, acting like the loving daughter they believed her to be. They watched a movie together, ate dinner as a family. Linda even played piano while Sarah and David listened. For a few hours, it almost felt like the family they used to be. But Sarah knew it was all a performance, because in just a few hours, her parents would be dead. At exactly 9:30 p.m., Sarah received a text message. One word: ready. The killers were in position. Her heart began to race. This was it, the point of no return. She looked at her parents, her mother reading a book, her father watching the news. And for a moment, doubt crept in. These were the people who had raised her, who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities, who loved her in their own complicated way. But then she thought about Marcus, about their future together, about the freedom that was just hours away. The doorbell rang at 10:15 p.m. Sarah's father went to answer it, and that's when the nightmare began. Two masked men pushed their way into the house. They had guns. They were shouting. Sarah's mother screamed. The sound was deafening, primal, terrifying. According to the plan, Sarah was supposed to be tied up and left in the basement while the killers did their work upstairs. But plans rarely survive contact with reality. The men were nervous, sloppy. One of them was clearly high on something. And when David Mitchell tried to fight back, everything went wrong. The first gunshot echoed through the house at 10:23 p.m. Linda Mitchell's scream was cut short by the second shot. Sarah, tied up in the basement, heard everything: the shouting, the struggle, the silence that followed. And then, footsteps coming down the stairs. One of the killers appeared, blood on his clothes, panic in his eyes. "Your mother's dead," he whispered. "Your father's still alive, but he's hurt bad. What do you want us to do?" This wasn't part of the plan. The plan was for both parents to die quickly and quietly. But now, her father was alive, wounded, potentially able to identify the killers. Sarah's mind raced. If her father survived, if he could speak to police, the entire plan would unravel. She looked at the killer standing before her, this stranger she had hired to destroy her family, and made a choice that would haunt her forever. "Finish it," she whispered. "Make sure he can't talk." But fate had other plans. Before the killer could return upstairs, they heard sirens in the distance. A neighbor had called 911 after hearing the gunshots. The killers panicked and fled, leaving Sarah tied up in the basement and her father bleeding but alive upstairs. The 911 call that followed was gut-wrenching, Sarah's voice shaking with what sounded like terror and grief. "Please help me. Someone broke into our house. They shot my parents, my mother. I think she's dead." The desperation in her voice was so convincing that even experienced dispatchers were moved to tears. When police arrived, they found a scene of devastating violence. Linda Mitchell, 53 years old, was dead from 2 gunshot wounds. David Mitchell, 55, was unconscious but alive, fighting for his life. Sarah told police that 3 men had broken into the house looking for money. They had tied her up in the basement while they robbed the house upstairs. She claimed she heard shouting, gunshots, then silence. The story seemed plausible. Robbery murders were not uncommon in the area. The house showed signs of being ransacked. Jewelry was missing. Cash was gone. But as investigators dug deeper, small details began to trouble them. Why hadn't the robbers taken more valuable items? Why had they left Sarah completely unharmed? And why did her story keep changing in tiny but significant ways? Detective Mike Rodriguez had been investigating homicides for 15 years. He had seen enough crime scenes to know when something didn't feel right, and nothing about this case felt right. Sarah's behavior was strange. She seemed more concerned about when she could return to the house than about her mother's death. She asked repeatedly about life insurance policies and inheritance procedures, and when investigators asked about her relationship with her parents, her answers were evasive and contradictory. She claimed they had a perfect relationship, but neighbors told a different story. The breakthrough came when David Mitchell regained consciousness 3 days later. Weak and traumatized, he looked at Detective Rodriguez and whispered words that changed everything. It wasn't strangers. Sarah. Sarah was talking to them. She knew them. The revelation hit the detective like a lightning bolt. The perfect daughter, the grieving survivor, was the architect of her own mother's murder. But proving it would require patience, skill, and a confession that would shock the world. Over the next several days, investigators built their case methodically. Phone records showed Sarah had been in contact with known criminals in the weeks leading up to the murder. Financial records revealed she had been researching her parents' life insurance policies. Most damaging of all, surveillance footage from a nearby store showed Sarah meeting with 2 men just days before the killings. The evidence was overwhelming, but investigators wanted a confession. They wanted to hear, in Sarah's own words, why she had orchestrated the murder of her own mother. The interrogation room was small, sterile, and equipped with cameras recording every word. Sarah sat across from Detective Rodriguez, still playing the role of the grieving daughter. She wore black clothing and spoke in whispers about her trauma. But Rodriguez had questioned hundreds of killers, and he knew what guilt looked like, what desperation sounded like, what lies felt like when they were falling apart. He began with simple questions about the night of the murder. Sarah repeated her story exactly as she had before, word for word, which was the first red flag. Traumatized witnesses rarely tell identical stories. Their memories shift and change. But Sarah's account was rehearsed, practiced, fake. "Tell me about your relationship with your parents," Rodriguez said calmly. Sarah's face lit up. "We were so close. They were the most loving, supportive parents anyone could ask for." But Rodriguez had done his homework. "That's interesting, Sarah, because your neighbors tell a different story. They say there was a lot of shouting in your house. Arguments. Tension. What were those arguments about?" Sarah's composure began to crack. Her hands started shaking. Her voice got higher. "Every family has disagreements. That doesn't mean anything." Rodriguez leaned forward. "What about Marcus Thompson, Sarah? Were your parents supportive of that relationship?" The color drained from Sarah's face. She hadn't expected investigators to know about Marcus. In her mind, she had kept their relationship completely secret, but police had been thorough. They had traced her phone records, her social media, her financial transactions. They knew everything. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah whispered, but her body language was screaming the truth. "Sarah, we know about Marcus. We know about the ultimatum your parents gave you. We know about the pressure you were under, and we know you were desperate to find a solution." Rodriguez's voice was gentle but firm. "Help me understand what happened that night. Help me understand why a daughter who loved her parents would orchestrate their murder." The word orchestrate hung in the air like poison. Sarah began to cry, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of someone who knew their lies were finally catching up to them. The confession took 4 hours. 4 hours of Sarah slowly admitting the truth, piece by piece, lie by lie. She talked about the pressure from her parents, the ultimatum to choose between family and love, the desperation she felt when Marcus threatened to leave her, the fantasy of inheriting money and starting fresh, the online research about hiring killers, the meetings with criminals, the planning, the night of the murder, and finally, the moment she told the killer to finish it when she realized her father might survive. By the end of the interrogation, Sarah had confessed to orchestrating the murder of her own mother, all for the love of a man who would eventually testify against her to save himself. The trial of Sarah Mitchell became one of the most shocking criminal cases in the region's history. A daughter who killed her mother for money and freedom, a boyfriend who manipulated her into believing murder was their only option, killers for hire who bungled the job so badly that the truth came out. The courtroom was packed every day with people trying to understand how love could become murder, how family bonds could be severed by greed and desperation, how a young woman could look her mother in the eye, knowing she would be dead within hours. Marcus Thompson, the boyfriend Sarah had killed for, testified against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. He claimed Sarah had pressured him into the murder plot, that he had tried to talk her out of it, that he never believed she would actually go through with it. His testimony was devastating, not because it was particularly damaging to Sarah's case, but because it revealed the man she had destroyed her family for was a coward who would say anything to save himself. The great love story that had motivated murder was nothing more than manipulation and selfishness on both sides. Sarah's defense team tried to argue that she was a victim of psychological abuse, that her parents' controlling behavior had driven her to a mental breakdown, that the pressure to be perfect had created a psychotic episode. But the evidence was overwhelming. The planning was too detailed. The lies were too sophisticated. The manipulation was too calculated. This wasn't a crime of passion or mental illness. This was premeditated murder, motivated by greed and the desire for freedom. The jury saw through every excuse, every justification, every attempt to shift blame. David Mitchell, Sarah's father and the sole survivor of the attack, gave the most powerful testimony of the trial. Wheelchair-bound and still recovering from his injuries, he looked at his daughter and spoke words that silenced the entire courtroom. "I loved you more than my own life," he said, his voice breaking. "Your mother and I sacrificed everything to give you opportunities we never had. We pushed you because we wanted you to succeed. We said no to your boyfriend because we could see he was using you. Everything we did out of love, and you repaid that love by hiring strangers to murder us in our own home." On March 15, 2015, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The judge called her crime an unthinkable betrayal of the most fundamental bonds of family and trust. Sarah showed no emotion as the verdict was read. No tears, no remorse. Just the cold stare of someone who had already lost everything that mattered, including her own humanity. Today, Sarah Mitchell sits in a maximum security prison, serving a life sentence for the murder of the woman who gave her life. Linda Mitchell was 53 years old when she died. She was a piano teacher who loved gardening and dreamed of becoming a grandmother someday. She died believing her daughter was tied up in the basement, never knowing that the child she had raised was the one who ordered her death. David Mitchell survived his injuries but has never recovered emotionally. He lives alone in a nursing home, a broken man who lost his wife and daughter on the same terrible night. Marcus Thompson, the boyfriend Sarah killed for, served 8 years in prison, and was released in 2023. He has never attempted to contact Sarah. He has never visited her in prison. He has moved on with his life, married someone else, started a family. The great love that motivated murder meant nothing to him. Sarah sacrificed everything for a man who forgot her the moment it became inconvenient to remember her. The 2 killers she hired were sentenced to life in prison. One died of a drug overdose in 2019. The other will likely never be released. But perhaps the most tragic part of this story is that it was completely unnecessary. Sarah was 24 years old, an adult. She could have moved out of her parents' house at any time. She could have gotten a job, supported herself, and lived with whoever she chose. Her parents' control over her was emotional, not physical. She had choices. She had options. She had a future that didn't require murder. But instead of choosing freedom through independence, she chose freedom through violence. Instead of building a new life, she destroyed the lives of everyone around her. How many of us have felt trapped by family expectations? How many have struggled with parents who don't approve of our choices? How many have felt suffocated by pressure to be perfect? The difference is, most of us find healthy ways to break free. We have difficult conversations. We set boundaries. We make hard choices. We don't hire killers to solve our problems. Sarah Mitchell's story is a reminder that love without limits can become obsession, that pressure without release can become violence, and that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the most unthinkable betrayals. What strikes me most about this case is how preventable it was. If Sarah had simply walked away from her family's control, her mother would still be alive. Her father wouldn't be broken and alone. She wouldn't be spending the rest of her life in prison. All of this pain, all of this destruction. For what? For money she'll never spend? For freedom she'll never experience? For a love that was never real? The price of her choices was everything, and in the end, she gained nothing. As I finish telling you this story, I can't help but wonder, was there ever a moment when Sarah looked at her mother and felt regret? When she realized what she was about to lose? When she understood that some choices can never be undone? We'll never know, because by the time Sarah Mitchell realized the true cost of her decisions, it was too late for everyone. What do you think? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Was Sarah a victim of her circumstances, or a cold-blooded killer who got exactly what she deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story left you as shocked as it left me, hit that like button so YouTube can recommend more true crime cases like this one to you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week we're covering another case that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about family loyalty. Until then, stay safe out there, and remember, the people we trust most are sometimes the ones we should fear most.